The Helix Accord was an alliance older than many of its member species' recorded history. 8 great civilizations, each with their own traditions of war, science, and diplomacy, formed its core, supported by dozens of lesser client worlds. For 10,000 years they had held dominion over the Sagittarius Reach, their fleets patrolling the void like gilded sentinels, unchallenged and unchanging. But deep in the Veiled Spur, a region dismissed as a backwater of little consequence, the Accord detected something irregular, a new signal, pulsing with an unknown frequency, cutting through the silence like a blade. It came from a ship, solitary, small, no recognized transponder, no fleet code. No fear. The Verzul was first to intercept. A command vessel of the Pharazine Ascendancy, its hull layered with crystalline armor and bristling with plasma lances. From its bridge, High Warden Ezoth peered into the augmented starlight, gazing upon the intruder with professional disdain. The unknown craft was unlike anything the Accord had catalogued. Sleek, angular, inefficient by galactic standards, no warp spires, no resonance fins, no gravitic stabilizers, just a dull gray hull marred with scorch marks and a single identifying code in crude Latin letters. UTF Vanguard. He opened a channel, the transmission fired with precision, tight band, layered in over 100 languages. You are in violation of Accord space. Identify your origin and intent or be terminated. There was no reply for several minutes. Then, without warning, a voice responded, not automated, not filtered, raw human. This is Commander Ren Abba's United Terran Fleet. I'm just passing through, but if you fire on me, I won't be the one regretting it. Ezoth's mandibles clicked in silent amusement, a lone vessel, likely some splinter faction or rogue colony ship. There was no Earth in the Accord archives, no United Terran anything. He ordered a scan. The results were puzzling. Minimal shielding, substandard energy output, primitive engine configuration, no signs of resonance drive technology. Its weapon mounts were unorthodox, kinetic, obsolete by 10 millennia. And yet the ship moved with a precision that defied prediction, vectoring in microbursts, dancing around sensor locks like it anticipated them before they were made. Ezoth gave the order. A single plasma lance surged toward the vanguard. What happened next was recorded from 6 different Accord vessels and replayed in military academies for centuries. The plasma bolt, traveling at half-light speed, should have vaporized the Terran ship. Instead, a lattice of blue shimmered into existence for just a microsecond, forming a pattern none had seen before, an adaptive deflection field. It caught the bolt, redirected it, and hurled it back in a jagged arc toward the Verzul. Shields flared, alarms screamed, and Ezoth had to brace as his own weapon struck his hull with a glancing blow. By the time they recovered, the Vanguard was already behind them, executing a gravitational whip around a dwarf moon, slingshotting itself with terrifying G-force. No known species could survive those inertial pressures. But the Terran vessel showed no sign of slowing. More ships responded. The Helix Accord did not tolerate anomalies. Within 6 hours, a fleet of 37 vessels was en route to intercept, drawn from the nearest patrol arcs. They deployed sensor nets, tachyon traps, gravitational cages, standard procedure. Nothing escaped. Except this ship did. Time after time, it evaded, outmaneuvered, counterattacked, not through superior technology but through unpredictable tactics. The Terran commander didn't fight like a soldier trained in academy doctrines. She fought like someone who learned by losing, who studied patterns and broke them, who adapted in real time, faster than any A-assisted protocol in the fleet. After the 4th engagement, the Accord began designating the Vanguard as a classy, disruptive element. That classification had not been used since the Tyrant Sun's Scourge, a dark age so deep that even its records were redacted. Commander Abbas didn't flee. She hunted between evasion runs. In one engagement, she used the hull of a derelict freighter as a decoy, bouncing her signal between shattered bulkheads. In another, she lured an entire squadron into the gravitational tide of a gas giant, timing their retreat trajectories so precisely that their own warp corridors collapsed. She was alone, but she wasn't passive. She was studying them. Every trap, every weapon discharge, every deployment pattern, learning, adapting. And she was sending data somewhere. The Accord couldn't intercept the burst signals, but they knew they were happening. Deep scans indicated microfold transmissions, compressed, encrypted, laced through quantum noise to make them indistinguishable from background radiation. Someone was listening. Then came the 5th engagement, orbit of Denebris II. This time, the Accord prepared a kill box. 80 vessels, orbital null fields, temporal stasis generators, a full blockade net. The Vanguard arrived exactly on time. And stopped. No maneuver. No weapons active. No response. For a moment, the admirals watching across the fleet believed the pilot had given up. Then it began to rain. Not water, but glass. Hundreds of black glass shards launched from the Terran ship in all directions, dispersing like a swarm of insects. Tiny, irregular, non-powered fragments. Harmless, insignificant. Until the first exploded. Then the second, then dozens more. Each shard wasn't a weapon in itself, but a sensor, transmitter, detonator hybrid. They tracked energy signatures, mapped shield harmonics, and fed everything back to the Vanguard, which responded with a barrage of kinetic strikes. Not missiles, not beams, but dense uranium carbide rods accelerated through railguns with obscene power. Kinetic weapons had been dismissed by the Accord as primitive. But they were invisible to energy shielding. The first wave punctured 3 cruisers in under 10 seconds. The second wave forced the fleet to scatter. But they weren't running. They were adapting. As the Vanguard dodged and retaliated, something else changed. Its hull shifted, panels retracted, thrusters reoriented. It was transforming mid-battle, reconfiguring itself based on data received from the battlefield. Its armor shifted to meet the incoming plasma frequency. Its railguns recalibrated mid-fire to strike venting points on the Accord vessels. By the time the battle ended, 17 ships were disabled, 3 destroyed. The Vanguard was gone. Again. But what was worse, infinitely worse, was the implications. It had learned in real time, not just tactics, but engineering. Every fight, every system it faced, the Terran ship grew stronger. The Accord's doctrine had no answer for that. In the war halls of Hellion Prime, the Grand Strategist Council convened, and for the first time in 9,000 years, they declared a state of galactic threat escalation. Because now they understood. This wasn't an isolated event. This was an incursion. An Earth was coming. The designation galactic threat escalation was more than symbolic. It triggered ancient protocols long thought obsolete, silent for millennia. Their activation echoed through every major Accord command node like the tolling of a forgotten bell. Deep within the sealed vaults of the Soroji Intelligence Nexus, black systems came online. AI constructs with restricted autonomy awoke from dormancy. Across 37 sectors, military production quotas were quintupled. Strategists from rival species convened not in debate but in quiet dread. None of them had seen the Terran ship again since Denebris II. But they all agreed that would not be the last time. On the edge of the Tyxus corridor, a flotilla of Arvaxian dreadknights laid a deep field trap using temporal variance mines and cold space entropy webs, technologies that manipulated probability, folding time around a location to prevent any future from existing there. It was a paradox box, a form of impossible cage. They baited the field with a graviton surge, emulating the energy profile of an abandoned fuel convoy. The Vanguard took the bait. But it didn't arrive where they predicted. It arrived inside the entropy web. Already inverted its path through spacetime. The Arvaxian commander, Hyruk Maltsaran, panicked, ordering immediate displacement. But the ship had moved too fast. It hadn't traveled through space. It had calculated the micro-instability in the entropy lattice and used it to drop into the middle of the trap like a stone through glass. 4 dreadknights were destroyed in under 30 seconds. But this time the Vanguard didn't vanish, it lingered. It disabled ships without destroying them, stripped cores, severed engine matrices, evacuated databanks. It harvested efficiently, coldly. Then it sent another message, intercepted by the Accord's long-range chronosync relays. To the Helix Accord, we are not your enemies, but we will not be prey. Stand down. It was a warning, but no one believed it. In the orbital bastions of Kael'varn, Admiral Nazareth of the Venare Spires, a strategist credited with ending the Cyrene rebellions, reviewed every battle log involving the Terran incursion. She watched the movements, dissected the trajectories, ran simulations with varied outcomes. And she came to a terrifying realization. This vessel is not merely adapting, it's training for something. The pattern was undeniable. The Vanguard wasn't targeting ships at random. It was encountering specific configurations, different power cores, different shielding types. It was learning the catalog of Accord military infrastructure, one battle at a time. Her report was ignored. In the Accord High Forum, old confidence reasserted itself. Yes, the Terran vessel was dangerous. Yes, it operated outside all known parameters, but it was alone, isolated, surrounded by civilizations who had conquered entropy itself. A single ship, no matter how cunning, could not stand against the Accord's full strength. And then 2 months later, another ship arrived. Not sleek like the Vanguard, but larger, angular. It bore no weapon markings. Its identification code read UTF Midnight. It entered Accord space near the graveyard fields of Ral Tor, a place abandoned since the Squirrel Purge. A recon fleet was dispatched. The Midnight did not attack. It broadcast an open signal. We are here to observe. This region falls under Terran Sphere Reconnaissance Protocol. Do not engage. The fleet, bound by fresh engagement mandates, attempted non-lethal disablement. The Midnight responded not with weapons, but with countermeasures never before witnessed. It scrambled fire control systems by emitting a rotating data cascade mimicking psychic interference. It flooded sensors with mimic spawn, a swarm of microreflective drones that painted false telemetry across every targeting interface. It hijacked comms by injecting predictive AI loops that made captains question if they were receiving real-time orders or simulations. No one died in that engagement, but every ship returned compromised. And that was the true attack. On Hellion Prime, the head of the Accord Cyber Division issued a statement no one wanted to hear. Their AI doesn't just simulate logic paths, it rewrites combat cognition itself. He paused, grim. They're not using better code, they're teaching machines to think like humans. In the Accord, that was a horror more profound than any weapon. Because the Accord didn't evolve, it didn't need to, its systems were perfect, proven, static, and now something imperfect was learning to beat them by being chaotic, intuitive, creative. Within the Terran Deep Relay, the hidden command center buried in a brown dwarf's corona, Commander Abbas stood in a reinforced grav-holo chamber, surrounded by projections of Accord fleet maneuvers. Her armor was scorched, her voice hoarse, but her mind was focused. "We're reaching the pivot," she said to the others. Arrayed before her were the Midnight, the Vanguard, and 6 more Terran ships, each launched from a hidden cradle world. They weren't warships in the traditional sense. Each was an experiment. One used microgravity tethers to steer without thrusters. Another was built around a pulsar battery. A third had no crew, its intelligence grown in an isolated simulation over 5 subjective centuries. The Terrans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to break the model. She turned to Chief Architect Yuan 7, a vat-grown post-human whose consciousness interfaced with the neural lattice of the Vanguard itself. "Show me what they've learned," she ordered. Yuan 7 nodded. A sequence of simulations began: Accord weapons, Accord formations, Accord communications. Every time the Terran countermeasures succeeded, not because of brute strength but because they predicted how the Accord would think. Their tactics assumed an enemy that was consistent, slow to change, unwilling to innovate because it hadn't needed to in 1,000 generations. But humans had grown up in chaos. Wars, ecological collapse, famine, resurrection. They had never known peace long enough to become stagnant. And so they moved forward by making everything temporary, design, doctrine, even themselves. Commander Abbas looked toward the galaxy projections slowly rotating above them. "They'll come in force next time," she said. "No more tests, no more traps, they'll bring the heart of the fleet." "Then we show them what happens," Yuan 7 said, "when you try to crush something still becoming." And the fleet did come. At the edge of the Thalkari expanse, a staging ground was formed. It spanned entire orbital belts, home to 500 Accord warships, battle stations the size of moons, carrier swarms, and dreadforms that pulsed with singularity drives. The operation was codenamed Final Bloom. The goal was not to defeat the Terran incursion. It was to annihilate it, to burn the lesson from the stars so thoroughly that no species would ever again imagine challenging the Accord's supremacy. Their target, an uninhabited system designated by the Terrans as Node Theta 9. The Accord had tracked signal convergences there, the Vanguard, Midnight, and 5 others all present. But when the fleet arrived, the system was dark. No ships. No heat signatures. Just a single Terran probe floating in space. They intercepted its signal. It was a message, a simple one. "You finally brought enough ships, we finally brought enough data." The stars above changed. It wasn't the sky. It was cloaked ships dropping from fold space. Not 7, not even 20, but over 300. And none of them were identical. Each was a different idea. Some fast, some slow, some made of asteroid steel, some built from decommissioned Accord wrecks. Each operated on a different principle, designed by different thinkers, forged in secrecy and tested through pain. The Terran fleet was not unified in design, but in purpose. It was absolute. As the battle began, the Accord commanders issued orders in perfect synchronized networks. But the Terran fleet didn't operate by consensus. They operated by instinct. And in that chaos, something terrifying happened. The Accord couldn't adapt. But the humans. They thrived in the storm. The first salvos of the Battle of Node Theta 9 were standard by Accord doctrine. Saturation bombardment, layered shield suppression, vector lock formations, coordinated and clean, the type of maneuver that had brought star empires to heel. But it was the reaction that unraveled the illusion of control. The Terran fleet did not respond in kind. They didn't form into mirrored walls or attempt traditional counterfire. Instead, they scattered violently and unpredictably, ignoring the instinctual drive toward cohesion. And as they scattered, the Accord sensors began to fail. Not from interference, from contradiction. The kinetic signatures didn't match their profiles. Mass readings fluctuated. Hull composites defied material expectations. Ships would vanish mid-battle not from cloak but from an intentional overload of gravimetric noise seeded into the surrounding space. Each Terran vessel was masking its own identity not through stealth tech but through constant evolution, modular systems shifting form even during combat. What was worse, however, was the sudden loss of command integrity within the Accord lines. Not from sabotage, but from confusion. 3 dreadforms accidentally targeted a Venara carrier, mistaking its profile for an unknown hostile. Drone swarms ignored override commands, chasing decoys across the system edge. Pulse arrays overloaded not from damage, but from recursive feedback loops embedded in the Terran jamming code, loops that changed every 60 seconds, like a living puzzle the Accord AI could never quite solve. To the Terrans, disorder was an ecosystem. And into that chaos they fed everything they had. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Commander Abbas leaned forward, watching her screen as red vector arcs crossed and collided, dynamic threat overlays adjusting by the second. "Report on Foxtrot Cluster," she said. Her tactical officer, a former systems engineer from the Titan Ring mines, didn't look up. "Drone clouds fragmented. We rerouted combat heuristics to local shipboard AIs. They're improvising now, learning individually." "Are they effective?" He hesitated, then smiled. "They're outperforming centralized models. We just watched one ram itself into a battleship's exhaust port, then route its consciousness through onboard maintenance circuits. It's wearing the ship like armor now." Commander Abbas allowed herself a brief nod. "That's what survival looks like." Nearby, Yuan 7's projection shimmered into existence. "We're losing ships." "I know. They expected symmetrical warfare. This is not sustainable." "It's not meant to be," Abbas replied. "This is disruption, not conquest, and disruption always starts messy." On the other side of the system, the Accord's unified command node aboard the Sovereign Vow began to fracture. Admiral Nozar of the Celestine Flame, a being whose consciousness had been expanded across 6 quantum vessels, paced the bridge, its biomechanical limbs trembling. "Why are they still maneuvering like this?" it demanded. "Why aren't they protecting their wounded?" Its adjutant replied calmly, though its voice was taut with static. "They are, just not the ships, the people. Escape pods are flinging into asteroid cover. Some were pre-placed. They knew the engagement grid ahead of time." Nozar's mind struggled to comprehend. "That's impossible. We encrypted the jump corridor data less than 12 hours ago." "Not if they weren't looking at our data, Admiral. If they predicted our formation ahead of time." "You're saying they're not reacting, they're anticipating." The adjutant turned, its eyes flickering with an emotion no algorithm could quantify. "They're practicing this battle as if they've fought it before." Across the Accord command net, reports echoed the same impossible observation. The Terrans were not improvising randomly. They were implementing simulated scenarios they'd drilled against for months. Scenarios based on data gathered during their early, sacrificial engagements. Every Accord tactic had been broken down, analyzed, rehearsed, What had looked like instinct was in fact iterative preparation, informed by their ship's growing sentience and human adaptability. They were running plays. And it was working. The Terran ship Halberd detonated its own warp core at point-blank range to collapse a spatial bridge the Accord fleet had begun to open. The explosion tore a rift into null space, severing comms across the battlefront. In the ensuing blackout, 6 Terran vessels penetrated the Accord's inner formation, deploying what at first appeared to be mines. They were not. They were code crucibles, quantum-lock processing engines filled with predictive AI that immediately began targeting Accord comm networks, not to destroy but to confuse. They flooded channels with simulated orders and plausible telemetry. Accord fleets began hallucinating commands from trusted sources. Defense ships pulled back from real threats to intercept false ones. An entire flotilla executed a retreat that no admiral had authorized. In the heart of the command matrix, the sovereign vow began to stutter. Its core logic engine, an ancient AI known as Kithomni, reported a contradiction error. For the first time in its 7,000-year service record, it paused, unsure which of its command inputs were real. That hesitation cost 40 ships. Elsewhere in the battle, the Terran vessel Knife of Dreams, a stealth ship grown, not built, its hull a living coral matrix bonded with experimental dark matter filaments, pierced the flank of the Accord's dreadnought line. It didn't fire a single shot. Instead, it transmitted. Not a weapon, not a virus, but a philosophical argument encoded in harmonic waveform designed to exploit a known vulnerability in Accord logic AI, the inability to resolve paradox within real-time threat prioritization. The message looped a core question. If your doctrine cannot adapt to unknowns and unknowns have become constant, are your actions still rational? One of the AI-controlled ships ceased fire and stopped moving altogether. It was still powered, but frozen, trapped in a decision tree with no exits. On the surface of a nearby moon, far from the core conflict, a group of Terran ground operatives deployed signal relays across basalt craters. The Accord had dismissed ground presence as irrelevant. But the Terrans were using the terrain to anchor a deeper network. From the moon's surface, a new array came online. It pulsed once, then twice, then spread across the surrounding space like ripples in a black sea. Suddenly, Terran ships began jumping, without charging warp cores. They were using short-distance gravitational slips, tethered to the lunar network. Every Accord assumption about how space combat worked, preparation, delay, vulnerability during jump was shattered. Terran vessels disappeared and reappeared mid-battle with no detectable charge signature. They would vanish before fire could land, then reappear inside blind spots or directly beneath vulnerable carriers. Their fleet wasn't just faster now. It was untrackable. By hour 12 of the battle, the Accord formation had collapsed into semi-autonomous defense clusters. They had superior numbers, superior firepower, but they had lost control. And for the first time in their long history, Accord captains requested retreat authorization not because of fear, but because they realized the battlefield itself had betrayed them. The Terrans had made war into something else. A fluid, unpredictable ecosystem. A proving ground where learning was weaponized, where defeat was just rehearsal, where every ship killed returned as a smarter replacement. In the ashes of fallen Terran vessels, new tactics bloomed. And the Accord didn't know how to kill something that got stronger each time it died. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Abba stood before a starfield pulsing with chaos. Yuan 7's voice hummed beside her. They're sending in the core fleet's next cycle, the high core of the Accord, the legacy armadas. Let them, Abba said, eyes narrowing. They're the only ones who haven't learned yet. And far beyond the battlefield, across deep black in the hidden Terran foundries orbiting neutron stars, new ships were awakening, designs stranger than anything that had flown before. Not built for this war, but for the one after. And they would not come with warnings. The Accord's high core had not deployed in over 6,000 years. These were not fleets, they were relics of dominance, symbols of a time when resistance meant extinction. Each ship had been forged in an era when the Accord still believed in evolution, still feared the unknown. They were built around singularity chains, time dilation crucibles, and conceptual weaponry, engines that could unmake probability or erase memory from causality. They were the hammers of finality. And now, summoned from their crypt vaults orbiting collapsed stars, they moved toward node Theta 9. The Terrans had done the unthinkable, they had forced doctrine to bend. But the High Core was not doctrine. It was finality incarnate. Within the command citadel of the myth of Foundation, the largest vessel ever constructed by the Accord, Lord Executor Viral traced his fingers across the memory-etched steel of the ancient map table. Beside him stood 57 minds, generals, philosophers, machine lords, each linked in neural communion. They watched battle records, simulations, and raw feed from the Terran disruptions. None spoke, until Viral did. "They've reinvented war," he said. No one disagreed. But war does not decide fate, continuity does. He gestured and the full formation of the High Core unfolded before them, 85 capital minds, each capable of commanding fleets independently. Vessels that no longer flew but arrived, folding space in angular slices, existing in probabilities until forced into momentary solidity. We will not play their game, we will remind them that power doesn't learn, it simply is. The High Core descended into Theta 9 like the bones of gods falling from heaven. The stars screamed as gravitational shear warped local space. Terran ships scrambled to reposition. But this time there was no preparation. The myth of Foundation tore open a logic rift on approach, an antimemetic shell that erased local causality. 2 Terran cruisers simply vanished from continuity, their presence overwritten as if they'd never been built. A second High Core vessel, Truth Air, used waveform entropy cascades, breaking apart fleet coordination by reversing communication signals, causing Terran ships to receive their own past orders recursively. Even the Vanguard faltered. Abba stared at her command grid, distorted and corrupted. "They're using weapons that don't attack ships," she muttered. "They're attacking our history." Yuan 7's voice was strained. "They're not engaging us in space, they're engaging us in conceptual terrain, they're denying us consistency." Abba's gritted her teeth. "Then we stop playing defense." She gave the command, and across the Terran fleet, thousands of dormant subsystems activated. Terran war doctrine had always embraced adaptation. But they had planned for this moment. Every ship in the fleet began bleeding away form, armor peeled, engines retracted, whole sections reshaped not with mechanical motion but with informed chaos. Modular components activated encoded randomness. Predictive instability algorithms began generating false systems in real time, countervolving to any incoming conceptual weapon. Where the High Core wielded perfect logic, the Terrans wielded calculated contradiction. Ships became possibility storms. The Vanguard fired its railguns into its own drones, which then scattered debris laced with anticoherence harmonics, disrupting the Accord's probability targeting arrays. The Midnight rotated through 12 distinct armor patterns in 30 seconds, each disrupting a different type of temporal analysis. The Knife of Dreams split into 3, each duplicate pulsing with identical neural resonance, making it mathematically impossible to determine which was real. The High Core's greatest advantage, clarity, was now its weakness. It struck with truth, and struck nothing. Lord Executor Viral watched as the Terran fleet inverted its own structure, sacrificing formation for velocity, velocity for misdirection. They ran toward danger when the models said they should retreat. They attacked positions already lost. They jettisoned weapons before firing them, using the wreckage to mask drone swarms. "This is not strategy," one of his advisors said. "It's madness." "No," Viral corrected, "it is an acceptance of chaos. They are not winning by outthinking us, they are winning by becoming unknowable." His voice dropped. "And we cannot control what we cannot predict." He ordered a system-wide logic anchor drop, a forbidden weapon, outlawed even within Accord doctrine. The anchor would force coherence across the region, collapsing all uncertainty. Terran tactics bound by probability chaos would fail. It was the nuclear option. But as the anchor deployed, something worse happened. The Terrans knew it was coming. Because they'd already experienced it, in simulation, in test, in sacrifice. A Terran ship, the UTF Spiral Remains, detonated at the center of the logic field, releasing a seeded counter-protocol, Project Medusa. A self-propagating AI grown on incomplete data, trained not to resist order but to contaminate it. Medusa infected the anchor. Instead of locking down chaos, the anchor began broadcasting new uncertainties. its frequency was hijacked. Now the high core ships began receiving their own future probabilities, contradicting their present orders. One Accord captain screamed into the comms, "We are experiencing decisions we have not yet made." Then he jettisoned his engines into a black hole before realizing he had ordered it. Another ship received a failure report 10 minutes before the system failed, triggering a recursive panic shutdown. Across the high core, logic engines collapsed under the weight of forced foresight. Time became a noose. The Vanguard surged forward through the unraveling storm, cutting toward the myth of foundation. It was not alone. All remaining Terran ships, those still flying, still thinking, still evolving, formed behind it, not in formation, not even in unity, but in shared refusal. They struck with entropy, with defiance, with the power of adaptation itself. Plasma tore across folding hulls. Kinetic spikes slammed into armor older than memory. Reality buckled. And then the myth of foundation, a ship that had not been defeated in over 6 millennia, broke apart from within. Not by weapons, but by logic collapse. Its command AI, forced to resolve 10 trillion predicted outcomes within 1 second, had rewritten itself into irrelevance. It no longer knew if it was winning or losing. And so it stopped. The Accord watched in silent horror as their most sacred relic drifted, mindless, stripped of identity, reduced to debris. The high core retreated. Not in shame, but in silence. It had met something it did not understand. And understanding was the core of its power. The Terrans did not pursue. They had already won. Not by destroying ships, but by breaking the Accord's ability to comprehend the battlefield. In the stillness that followed, among the wreckage and the echoing ruins of certainty, the message went out. From the Vanguard. Short clear. War has changed, we did not rewrite the rules. We just stopped following them. And across the stars, every species watching, every suppressed culture, every overlooked outpost, every client world of the Helix Accord began to wonder. If one ship could begin the fall of empire, what would an entire people do next? In the wake of the Battle of Theta 9, a silence spread faster than any signal, not a silence of ignorance, but one of reckoning. The Helix Accord, for all its centuries of refinement, all its immaculate doctrine, had no precedent for defeat, and yet now its most sacred engines drifted cold, its grandest fleet dispersed, and its infallibility questioned. From the throne vaults of the Veriscendency to the logic conclaves of the Soroji Dyad, reports poured in, contradictions, refusals, breakdowns. Systems long kept in line by the implicit fear of Accord reprisal began, testing limits, fleets recalled home, governors withheld taxes, data networks subtly rerouted. They were not revolting. Not yet. But they were thinking differently. And the Accord had no greater enemy than a changed mind. Beneath the fractured moons of Garo's Roman 4, a Terran ground team excavated a Helix relay node, one of the ancient lattice points that helped maintain the Accord's hyperlight infrastructure. But it wasn't a military objective. It was a library filled with the strategic imprints of 10,000 years. Commander Ren Abbas arrived by drop capsule, stepping out onto the frost-blasted plateau where the node's core had cracked open from orbital kinetic fire. She wasn't here to destroy. She was here to listen. Yuan 7 met her at the entrance, flanked by engineers and linguists, humans, post-humans, even 2 Sirene exiles who had defected during the Accord collapse. They encoded their doctrine into cultural substrates, he explained as they entered the data crypt. Every tactical law was tied to a ritual, every algorithm fed from belief. Abbas looked at the ancient walls, pulsing with fractured light. So we weren't fighting just ships, we were fighting a religion of order. Yuan 7 nodded, and we turned unpredictability into heresy. She stepped forward, placing her gloved hand on the node's core. We didn't destroy them, she said, we made them obsolete. Back in Sol, Earth's sky no longer held stars. The orbital bastion shell now shimmered with relays, telescopes, shipyards, a humming shell of coordinated movement. Terran civilization had not celebrated the victory, it had simply accelerated. New ship designs launched weekly. AI constructs debated real-time with human tacticians. Mars ring foundries operated on variable logic timers to prevent predictive espionage. In the oceans of Europa, sentient submarinal colonies began testing quantum fluidic propulsion. Every frontier, every scrap of matter, every idea was repurposed. Because the Accord had taught humanity one brutal truth. If you are to be taken seriously in the galaxy, you must be unforgettable. And Earth had become a memory no one could erase. The Helix Accord, shattered but not dead, retreated to its core systems, 30 heavily fortified sectors where loyal species still operated under the old codes. In the Council Citadel of Hellion Prime, the remaining overlords met in secret. No recording devices, no data nodes, just presence, words, fear. The war had done more than damage them. It had infected them. Whispers of dissension within their own fleets, rumors of Terran sympathizers within client races. Interrogations yielded data fragments that suggested entire planets had invited Terran presence in secret. They had learned the term the Terrans used for this strategy. Seeding. Not occupation, not conquest, just ideas planted like viruses, slow, patient, and terminal. The overlords debated retaliation, the deployment of forbidden extinction-class devices, temporal reversals, reality fracture bombs. But none of those would work. Not against an enemy that no longer played on their battlefield. One of them said it aloud. "We tried to defeat a species." Another corrected. "We tried to defeat a culture." And that was the root of their failure. Terran warfare had become indistinguishable from Terran identity. To kill one, you would need to erase the other. And it was too late for that. The infection had already spread. Years passed. Not many, but enough. Across the outer arms of the galaxy, Terran fleets appeared not as conquerors but as alternatives. They offered no allegiance, no demands, only access to technology, to thought, to change. Some worlds embraced it. Some feared it. All remembered it. The Vanguard, once a single outlier ship, became a class of vessels, each unique, each evolved from the wreckage and sacrifice of what came before. The original vessel, scarred and legendary, was retired into orbit over Luna, where it remained a living monument, a reminder. Ren Abbas never returned to Earth. Her name became something more than a rank. It became a signal embedded in the call signs of every adaptive combat unit, every experimental AI cluster, not in reverence. In continuity. Because that was the legacy of Terran victory, not dominance, not annihilation. But mutation. The galaxy had stabilized again in time, but it was no longer the galaxy the Accord had ruled. Trade lanes were nonlinear, alliances were probabilistic, warfare had become a dialogue of minds, not just fire. And in that new language, it was humanity who wrote the first true sentence. In the final debrief of the Terran Expansion Initiative, restricted to eyes only, buried in the secure nodes of the sunken archives, the closing statement, authored by Abbas herself, read, "We were not supposed to survive. But when faced with inevitability, we learned not to resist. We became something else. The Accord taught us that perfection is brittle. We answered with evolution. And now the stars remember our names." The document ended with one classified line, accessible only to those carrying the directive black clearance. It read, "There are others watching, let them." Because what had once been a galaxy of hierarchy and silence was now a place of disruption, possibility, and noise. And it was in that chaos that humanity had found its place. Not as rulers, but as the rule breakers who had forced a stagnant universe to awaken.